Welcome everybody to the readings from Oconomowaukee series from Books and Company and Boswell. Thank you for joining us today. Let me introduce Lisa Baudoin from Books and Company.
Hi everybody, I am thrilled to be welcoming and honored to be welcoming Abi Daré, the author of The Girl with the Louding Voice. Abi grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, leaving to pursue and complete a law degree in the UK, which then led to a master's in international project management and a master's in creative writing. It's not a stretch to say that Abi shares the same passion for reading and learning as Aduni does, which if you haven't read the book, you will know soon. In 2018, The Girl with the Louding Voice won the Bath Novel Award. It has since gone on to become a bestseller in the UK, and it was an instant New York Times bestseller here in the US and a Read with Jenna book club pick. Abi joins us today from her home in London, and welcome, Abi. We thought we would have you start with just maybe a short elevator pitch about the book, and then I think you've selected part to read to us as well. So why don't we start there?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So exciting to be here, and thank God for technology because I can see all of them. So The Girl with the Louding Voice is a story about a 14-year-old girl named Aduni who wants nothing more than to be educated. Now, when her mother, who has always advocated for education, dies, Aduni finds herself needing to overcome many obstacles, ends up becoming a housemaid for a wealthy family in Lagos. But despite all these seemingly insurmountable obstacles, Aduni never loses her infectious, wonderful, joyful spirit. She keeps on pursuing her dreams, and the book is her journey as she tries to get that which she truly believes in. And if you want me to go straight into reading, I'm going to be reading from chapter 29 today of The Girl with the Louding Voice. And I tried to read this in what I call Aduni's voice, so forgive me if it sounds a bit funny, but here we go. Chapter 29. Fact: with over 250 ethnic groups, Nigeria has a wide variety of foods. The most popular include jollof rice, skewered pieces of grilled meats and peppery meat called suya, and akara, a delicacy of bean fritters. Middle of the afternoon on Sunday, the whole compound is filling with different cars. It's like nothing I ever see. Cars with shape like aeroplane and helicopter, like boats and buckets. Some of them short with no roof. Others are tall like Big Madam's car. All of them are looking too costly. I don't see the women's coming down from the car because Big Madam say I should be weeding the weed in the backyard grass. I ask her why she's wanting me to weed grass on Sunday afternoon. And she pick up a stone from the backyard and use it to knock me hard in the head and call me idiots for daring to ask me questions. As I was pulling the grass in the outside on Sunday, Kofi called me to the kitchen. I'm going crazy here, he said. Go and wash your hands, I need your help. I washed my hands and Kofi gave me a tray full of small fried meats with green pepper and onions with toothpick in the middle of the meats. Here is the stick meat, he said. Take it inside the living room and serve all the women. I looked the tray at the way Kofi arranged the meats in a circle style around the edge of the plate, with one small tomato at the center of the plate. I should just give them the meats, I asked, one by one. And the tomato, what am I doing with that one? That is not a tomato, Kofi said with a sigh. It's a cherry. It is used to garnish the plate. Leave it as it is, Aduni. I beg you, don't touch the food. Do not attempt to pick up the food for anyone. If you touch it, Big Madam will pour it all into the bin and ask me to cook a fresh one. If that happens, Chale, I will skin you alive. So keep your mouth shut, your head down, hold out the tray and curtsy like this. Kofi bent his knee quick, stand up. I repeat, do not speak to anyone. Serve the food and come back here. Is that clear? Now, where on earth did I put that pot of jollof rice? As I entered the parlor with the tray, I turned to the first woman standing in front of me. Her skin is a rich, dark color, shiny, smelling of bitter oranges and firewood. A sharp, strange smell that sliced my nose and caused it to tickle. She's wearing a tight green dress, short to her knees area, the round top of her smooth breast peeping from the neck of it. Her hair is low cut, the brown of a tree bark, with one line on the side of it, a parting from her ears to the middle of her head. Every makeup on her face is green color, except of the blood red of her lipstick. Even her eyes balls is a sharp green. I keep my eyes to the floor as I'm giving her the tray. Who is this one? She asked, talking with a high cracking voice, the voice of a too much smoker. Florence, is this the new maid you told me about? Thank you.
I don't know whether to go, you know, I was going to ask you the most famous question in all of question asking, which is the inspiration for the book, but I'm like, no, I want to go to that party. But I think we have to ask.
Sure.
How'd you get the idea for the book?
So I think the idea was something that carried with me all my life, but I probably did not realize it. So I grew up in Lagos, which is a city very reminds me a lot of New York, but quite different. Very hustle and bustle, kind of noisy, lovely, vibrant city in West Africa and Nigeria. And I lived in a middle class to affluent neighborhood. And it was very common for families like mine, including mine, to hire young girls as maids, most especially girls. You would find boys, but it was mainly girls. And as a girl myself, growing up in Lagos, who grew up in a I'll call it privileged background, I had a lot of questions as to why many of those girls, like myself, were living with families and doing all the chores while girls were working for my family. And while I'll go away to boarding school, many of those girls were not educated. And sometimes you would tell, in fact, oftentimes you could tell who a maid was when you came across a family of four in a restaurant because of the way she was dressed or the look in her eyes. There was just always something that made them so different. And so I left with questions because I couldn't voice them, as in the society I grew up in, questioning adults was seen as an insult. So I sort of internalized those questions and left the country, came to the UK, you know, probably just carried that around with me. And then I had my daughters. And so when my daughter turned 8, it wasn't uncommon to find an 8-year-old working. We had a conversation around the dishwasher. I asked her to help with the dishwasher and she replied with, yeah, I don't want to do it, blah, blah, throwing tantrums. And I said something that I probably said to her forever. I'd always said it to her, but for some reason that evening it struck. I said, look, do you know the young girls like you who are probably working for families in Nigeria? And I think I even said this in Yoruba. And she understands it, but can't speak it. And her reaction was in English. She said, Mom, why would anyone send their daughter to be a maid? And then she goes on to, you know, do they get paid? Would you pay me for doing the dishwasher? But I think that my response to her and her horror brought back a lot of questions I had when I was at that age. And so that night I went into researching, especially, you know, looking at some of the videos I'd come across online about documenting abuse. And I decided there and then, because I was doing my MA in creative writing, I had to hand in 3,000 words on my thesis. So it turned out that I thought to myself, this is what I need. I felt like I was born to write the story. And so then that night I started to write the story based on some of the stuff I saw online. There was a particular article that actually struck me about a 13-year-old girl who had her whole body sort of scalded with hot water. And in the article, her face was a blur. It was as if she was another statistic to report, as if she was a nobody. And I wanted to answer that question, who is the girl in the story? And who were the girls that I knew growing up? And so that sort of, from there was basically a spiral effect on me writing the book.
Yeah, and I noticed too, what really struck me is the need to ask questions. And Adeni is so full of questions. And what a privilege it really is to be able to ask a question and get an answer. And how it drove her curiosity and how frustrating it was for her to not be able to ask the questions. Yeah, it's essential, isn't it?
It is. And like I've said, you know, we grew up, and I still say it, the things are not as it was when I grew up in the 90s, but you still see, especially when there's a class divide, when you're perceived as from poverty or from a lower class, you can't really be asking questions. And even if you ask the questions, you should expect a really sharp response, or should expect to be told off. And that's why I really wanted to show that there are many girls like Adeni who have questions to ask. Not all of them speak up, but I chose to make this character one that chooses to speak up and talk, either internally or to voice out her feelings.
Yeah.
Well, she's just she's such a vibrant character. I mean, you can't help but fall in love with her. And of course, that drives us through a book that can be pretty tough. You know, there's some terrible things that happen in the book. And Lisa and I were talking, and we're going to give something away. A lot of folks here have read the book. We've sold a lot of copies. Lisa sold a lot of copies. But we almost like, especially for a certain kind of reader, a little older reader, like, don't worry about it. she's gonna be okay. Because they just need that, you know, but because you know, like you don't, you know, oh, goodness gracious. Lisa, do you want to ask a question, or I'm just going to ask another one?
Well, I was going to say, I have to admit that I read ahead, and I skipped and read ahead, and I read, and then I skipped and read ahead, because I'm so bad at peril whenever somebody's in peril. So, and then I went back and reread once I knew she was okay.
Yeah, Lisa was my exhibit A.
I'm not older.
Oh no, I guess I was thinking like a teenager or something.
Yeah, it's true.
Got out of that one. So what's your question, Lisa?
Well, I thought it was your question now, but my question, I'm curious too about what pulled that sense of optimism. Where did that come from? Where was the well to pull that again and again and again?
I think it partly comes, sometimes I think of Aduna as a metaphor for Nigeria. Nigerians are very optimistic, and we've been through, as a nation, we've been through a lot, especially around the bad governance that we have gone through. And we still come out we're a resiliently happy bunch. We laugh at things we shouldn't be laughing at, and we have a lot of humor we make a lot of fun of the government. So I think at a very, very high distant level, that was there. But I think it was important for me to be able to tell the story without seemingly telling a sob story. I felt that it was important for the girl to not be seen as one that you would need to sympathize with as opposed to empathize with. And so you feel her pains, but you also feel her joys. So she goes through really tough times. But it was important for me to actually write the book that way. I'll be honest and say, when I first wrote many, many chapters, I think maybe the first 30, 40 chapters, she cried a lot, and there was a lot of tears, and her optimistic spirit wasn't as, I think it wasn't shining through. And I realized that was a heavy experience for me as a writer. I felt bereft, I felt burdened by that. And I knew that was because I wasn't getting to the heart of who she really was. And I felt that she really wanted to prove herself. And so I went back and I found out that the scenes where I'd shown her optimistic side, her happy, humorous side, and even in the face of sorrow, she still finds hope in that. I found that I enjoyed writing those scenes more. So I realized that this is exactly who she wants to be. She wants to be that optimistic, happy person who is resilient and tackles her obstacles with a great attitude. And I know not everyone's like that, but I do demanded that. And so I listened to her and I gave her that.
You had mentioned that you did do research on this book, and without getting into too many details, but I think I'm sure everybody's interested to know what kind of work this entailed. Sure,
thank you. So a lot of the research I did actually came from my background growing up. So seeing housemaids in practice, you can imagine every single household. Maybe you live in a neighborhood of maybe 100 people, and only one household didn't have a maid. So you could tell, you know, every single household. And I was a kind of girl who would ask questions growing up. So to the maids, I would ask them. I remember one particular maid of one of our neighbors who we're quite close with. And we struck a very rare friendship over 6 weeks because I was staying with them over that summer. And she was the most optimistic, bright-eyed, wonderful girl that I knew. And then she left shortly after that because housemates tend to move on they don't tend to stay in families, and she moved on very quickly, and I never knew where she was. So I think part of my relationship with her for that research, but also doing a lot of reading, especially around the legalities of these things. You know, what does the law say? What did the law say then? What does the law say now? What am I writing about? And then watching a lot of videos and speaking to a lot of people and some of the maids. So as I was writing the book, a few trips to Lagos, to Nigeria, speaking to not just maids, actually. I spoke to drivers and chauffeurs and other domestic workers because they experience similar kind of abuse in certain ways. So just trying to steal questions without their bosses knowing that I was trying to do that. And one of my friends actually let me speak to her maid. I did ask her questions around her education. Did you want to go to school and all of that? So all of that, plus a lot of watching a lot of YouTube videos, especially the ones that documented abuse, and reading a lot of newspaper articles. So all of that came together and kind of formed the basis of my research.
I have one follow-up question. just because it's something you said that Dory, who's listening in, sort of asked about as well. You said, what was the law then? What was the law now? And she asked, you had mentioned that things aren't exactly the same as they were in the 90s. So I'm curious as to what was the law then? What was, what has actually changed over the past 30 years?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in the 90s. I think in 2003, a law came out around, the minimum age. And I put that in quote because there's a lot of questions around what that really means. So when the general rule is, I think it was between 16 and 18, I'm not sure, but that's not enforced. And so while there is something has been passed in the Houses of Parliament and a bill has come out and all of that, it's still not enforced. So, but there is an awareness. And I think that's what prompts, especially in the advent of social media, and now that people can actually record stuff. So you find a lot of people recording abuse and putting on social media, and that would lead to an arrest. So there's been a lot of arrests. And while in the past, and I remember speaking to my mother who grew up in the sort of the 60s, and she said, Abi, it wasn't even anything anyone thought about. She calls us young girls, you guys think about these things, think about human rights, and you really think deeply. We didn't think about that. And I think that's what has happened. The involvement of the law has allowed us to really think about what we're doing, but there's still impunity and people still get away with these forms of abuse. But I think there's a lot more awareness.
And it's possibly changing things then too.
It is. I think especially with, like I said, with social media, I saw a documentary the other day, I think it was December before my book came out. It was just a 4-minute clip, and I don't think the actual entire documentary has been released, but it felt like they had taken Aduni and maybe shrunk her to be a little bit younger. So it was about an 8-year-old girl. And it was basically the young girl waking up in a house, a household, and doing all the chores. And at the end of the 4-minute clip, I think it was, she was waving goodbye to the young girl in the family who was going off to school. And she was there in her clothes with holding a broom. And I thought, wow. And that documentary generated millions of comments. A lot of Nigerians were enraged saying, when will this end? And I thought, okay, well, my book is safe now. It's going to come out and people are going to read this. And it really just sort of was almost a mirror of what I had seen in that documentary. So yes, there is a lot of awareness and people are reacting and choosing to speak up a lot more. But there's still a lot of abuse going on. Was
there a point when you were writing it, because it was the story, the voice, the character came to you, but was there a point, a pause where you were thinking, gosh, this could cause problems or Absolutely. This could really change, did you set out to write a book to change minds, or were driven by the voice?
I set out to write a book to get through my grades. I thought I'll just get an A and just live like a nice quiet life. But to be honest, I think deep down, I'm that writer that I love to write about things that I feel should be talked about, things that are not often talked about and are overlooked. And I think there was a spark of hope within me that maybe a publisher would get to see this. But I wrote the story for myself. I wrote the story to try and hear the girls' voices. And it was really, if you know this girl, would that change how you treat her? If you take an opportunity to get to know people, will that change how you treat them? And I think it will. And so that was really the driving force for writing the book. But when I knew it was going to be published, I think the night before it came out in the UK, I said to my husband, is it too late to pull out? And he was like, well, a few people might kill you, but go ahead and do it. So because I was terrified. I thought, what have I done, right? I've put my country out there. I've talked about what we all do, including my family. My mother's probably going to read this. What have I done? But then the feedback has been so encouraging. I've gotten a lot of people saying, Abi, thank you for telling the story that needed to be told. I've had people who were former housemates say, Abi, you told my story. And nothing beats that. Nothing beats that feeling of knowing that you've told a story that needed to be told.
Sometimes it can be a little tough to be more than a writer, but this sort of figure that stands for justice, how should we say? So I'm glad you're handling it well, because it's a tall order. You have, we're talking about what's more the second half of the book, but the first half of the book is almost more. No, they're both horrifying. Where Aduni is, has that great relationship with her mother, and when her mother dies, her I'm not giving anything away because that's the way the book opens, you know, is basically sold off to be a third wife. How has what's been, most people focus on the maid part of the book, or has there been talk about the, you know,
Both.
having a 14-year-old child?
Yeah. I think both. There's been a lot of, because child marriage, it does happen in Nigeria, but I think it's more prevalent in certain parts of the country than in
Rural,
others.
yeah.
So yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of people that are from that part of the world, they tend to really focus on that, and they want to talk about that. But then the majority of the feedback has really been around Aduni's experiences as a maid, especially from Nigerians. They are looking for ways to help to make a difference in that. And maybe it's because of what you can control, I think, because I think if you can't really stop a family from selling, I mean, you might try to stop a family from selling off a young daughter too, but if it's because of religion or because of culture, because of a norm that has been going on for years, it's difficult. But you can go to your neighbor and knock on their door and say, you are hiring an underage girl and I will report you. So it's kind of, so I think maybe that's why that's sort of.
It becomes more of an urban problem as opposed to a rural problem.
Exactly.
You probably have more urban readers.
Exactly.
Yeah. The book is published in Nigeria then?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Excellent.
Was that your question, Danielle? Oh,
no, I'm going to ask what other languages it's published in.
It's right now 13 other languages.
Oh, great.
Wow.
Do you have copies of all of them?
I don't. And I wish, you know, it's interesting because I'm thinking, even if I don't know what Aduni is saying, but it's amazing because I think she would be so proud of herself to know that she's going to be in simplified Chinese or in you know, in Swedish. You know, it's incredible.
I will tell you, you should try to get a hold of them. I have seen when we've talked to authors, they'll show up the Japanese version of like this.
I can't wait to get them as soon as they come out.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've thought about that too, what Aduni would say about being here and how well you told her story.
I think
she would be a great conversation partner. When Ken and I were talking about it at the store, he was saying that when he first started it, he was really kind of hesitant that he wasn't going to be able to get very far because of the broken English. And he said, boy, within a page or two, it was just music. He, you know, and it just kept going for him. And I felt the same way too. In fact, sometimes it was very poetic. The choices that you made to phrase certain things felt, it betrayed her intelligence instead of being the naive person people would want her to be. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you came to that voice and to the broken English and
how you use language to sort of further the story?
Sure. So going back to my childhood, the girls that I knew that worked for my family and many families around us, they didn't speak they did not speak standard English. So they had either had 1 year of education or zero education or 2 years. And so they came to English language in their own way. They navigated around the language in their own way. But I loved that as a child. I remember just listening to some of our maids and just being fascinated at how they describe things. And I found it fascinating as well that I could instantly understand what they were saying. And so when I came to writing the book, I felt that for me to tell Aduni's story and to divorce myself as an author from this girl who has a very different background to mine, the easiest way for me to do that as a vehicle was to have her voice completely altered, but to meet the expectations of what I had as a child around some of the girls that I knew growing up. And so to get to that, it was a mixture of, well, I think a confluence of the girls that I've heard growing up. And I remember speaking to my husband, who's Nigerian as well, and saying, what were the things that your housemates used to say? And he had loads. He was like, oh, we had one that used to say this and describe this and that. So I took a lot of that, spoke to friends, took that. But also I speak another language. My mother language is called Yoruba. And I find that, and I think that's the same in many languages as well, that when you do a literal translation of a language into English, you kind of get what the person is saying, but it doesn't sound quite right. And that's the same in Aduni. So say you want to say in Yoruba that I have a headache or my head is hurting. If you literally translate that, it says my head is breaking me. That's really, if you took it apart. And so that was another way into Aduni's voice. And then my daughter, who was 2 years old at that time, who was born in the UK, had probably been to Lagos when she was 6 months old, was also learning English language. I thought it was fascinating that she, who had never lived outside of the UK, had her own interesting way of navigating English language. So I remember following her around the kitchen in her diapers, and she would say something, I'd be like, yes, I'm going to use that. And I'll sort of run to my little book and I'll write it in there. So things like tomorrow after tomorrow, except of, and a few other things, I borrowed it from her. And so bringing all those together created Aduni's voice. And I remember that as I was writing, it really, really made me slow down. And I'm glad that I'm hearing that from readers, because I think that stories of girls like that should really not be rushed. I think that we get a lot of statistics, like I said, and you get desensitized and you don't connect with it anymore when you hear 70% of girls are out of school, or 1.3 million girls are out of school. Those are huge numbers, and they sometimes just gets muddled up around the news that we get. So writing that way forced me to really get into who she is, into her character, into the way she sees things and tastes and smells things. And I'm glad that sort of transferred over to the reader experience as well.
Yeah, it's so true that just the best way to highlight a problem or something like that is to just focus in on one person and bring them to life, so that we care so much about them. And then we just have this habit, unfortunately, of desensitizing ourselves. And Absolutely. You make the book just overwhelmingly sensory. And she's such, as you said, she's not a sympathetic character, she's an empathetic character. I love that. I was actually writing, I never do this, but I love so many of the lines in the book, and I love when I think Aduni says, I pick up my sorrow and lock it in my heart. Is that something people say? I'm like, did you come up with that yourself? Do you want to do gritty?
I think she came up with it. Like I said, the writing in that voice really, I think it transformed me as a writer as well. I think the experience, I started writing that book, and I came out of it a totally transformed writer, totally different writer, because it forced me to really break down and really think about every single word I was putting on the page. And I would not have done that if I had done this in standard English. So that quote you read there was really what she came up with. And many times I'll write that and I'll think, where on earth did that come from? Wow, that's nice. So yeah.
Does she still talk to you? Is she still there?
No, the other day I picked up when this was delivered. I love this cover, by the way, and I picked it up and I thought, oh gosh, it felt so alien. It felt different, and I decided not to read it because if I start, I would get pulled into it and I will not be able to write anything else. Because when I stopped writing The Girl with the Louding Voice, it took me, I think, 6 months to write in standard. Like I could not construct proper English. Like I'll send emails and have to delete it and really think about what else. It's just really weird. Think about what I was doing. And even at home, I would say things and my daughter would be like, Mom, that's Aduni speaking.
You're locked in her voice.
I was in my head for 3 years. So she was a part of my life. And I grieved her when it was all over. I cried when my editor said this was it. That Abi, this is it. This is the final stage of editing. I remember crying.
Well, this is where, this is a question one sort of says at the end, but someone just asked, what are you working on now? And I'm very curious as to not just what you're working on now, and I'm glad you're not thinking, not that some people love sequels, and the last person I talked to, it turned out the book was continuing and everybody cheered, and everybody always cheers, but they don't, but so what are you working on now? And here's another question. If you were going to write about another person in this book and bring them to life, who would that person be?
Gosh, I love that question.
That is a good question.
Who would it be? I think I might like to write about maybe Big Madam and Tia, and I think the women on that street, actually. Because
Women of Wellington.
The Women in Wellington, that's the title there. I think
quench
I
their short stories.
I think I might like to explore their lives. Yeah, that's something that I might think about for sometime in the future. But in terms of sequels, I said that, when I was writing this book, my plan was just to write that one story. But my mother, who hadn't read a word of fiction in 30 years, she's very academic. She's a professor of taxation. She locked down forced me to read my book. And she went to Lagos and she was at home and she was like, she sent me a WhatsApp, I'm going to start reading now. And she finished it very quickly and she called me and said, I have something to say to you in very serious voice. I've read your book. I enjoyed it, but I don't quite agree with where you ended it. So there has to be a part 2. And this is what needs to happen. And she goes, Marufa needs to do this. Aduni needs to go back. She needs to be an advocate. She needs to be a human rights activist. And she went on and on and on. And I was like, because I was multitasking. And she said, did you get me? I said, yes, Mom. And she hung up. And 2 minutes later, I kid you, I got an email from my mother, as discussed. These are the points that I raised in my conversation with you. You need to finish that book properly. And to get asked that question, I say to people that somebody else has done a lot of the groundwork for me. I just need to find the time to write it. But I don't know. We'll see where it goes. If Aduni wants to come back, she will come back. I think she's that much of a force to reckon with, and we'll have to wait and see. I'm not going to rule it out.
Okay.
So have there been writers or books that you've read or that sort of encouraged and inspired you to become a novelist?
Oh, loads. I always say that whatever I'm reading at the moment is what I'm sort of loving, and it always inspires me. But I was inspired by Toni Morrison, Chimamanda Adichie. I love Maya Angelou. She's, a huge inspiration of mine. And just so many authors out there that I've really inspired. I loved Anthony Doerr. I love Ian McEwan, who wrote Atonement, which I read last year. Yeah, so quite a few.
Well, I was just noticing that there are just so many Nigerian British, Nigerian American writers that I love, and not just, Chinua Achebe and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, but, I was thinking about, I've loved Teju Cole, I've loved, Chigozie Obioma.
I actually recommended him for the other, I did a video the other day for Read Regina, and I loved The Fisherman was beautifully written.
We did like 3 events. Because he's in Nebraska, or he was in Nebraska. He would be so, I'm so glad you read. He's so wonderful, and that book is so amazing. I totally in agreement with you. I loved Girl, Women, Other, the Bernardine Evaristo. I mean, it's not a specifically Nigerian story, but she is, but that's a spectacular book. What do you think? It's a large country, it's one of the largest countries, but do you think there's something about Nigerian culture that creates so many amazing writers?
I think because we have a lot to say. And I think we grew up we were brought up with storytelling. Well, I was, and I think a lot of Nigerians were. I remember going to uncles' houses, and these are very educated, very distinguished gentlemen. And, when they see us as young girls and boys, then they would ask us to sit down. I remember one particular uncle of ours, and he asked us to sit down and he'd tell us stories, folklore and all of that. And my grandmother used to tell stories. My mother is an amazing storyteller. So I think we grew up around that. And I think that probably is why we write a lot and write well. And I think also, because it's such a vast, disparate country, over 250 ethnic groups, there's so much to say about wherever corner you are in Nigeria, you have something to say.
Yeah, I didn't even, I wrote down a bunch. I was like, what else did I love? My Sister, the Serial Killer by
that's great. Yeah.
Such a great book. Children of Blood and Bone, the young adult book, Tomi Adeyemi, and then Akweki Amizi, the Freshwater, and a whole bunch of other books. Very prolific writer. Oh my goodness. Anyway, Lisa?
So Daniel, you're now going to need to make a whole entire list of the Nigerian authors that you've just rattled through.
Oh yeah, I can send that out to everybody. We can send an email out to everybody afterwards. And you're getting a lot of compliments, and it's harder for me to forward them to you, but I will send you the chat afterwards. or I'll send it to Jamie, who will get you the.
They're lovely. They're really lovely.
Yeah. So people teaching it in schools. I'm curious, has this gone? This is an interesting book because in a way, I think the book would resonate with high school students amazingly well. It's written in a very direct way that I think people appreciate, but I can see the teachers saying, oh, I don't know, it's too, it's got too many issues that I don't want to, So how is this, have you had, younger people reading the book, and how's that gone over?
Yeah, my niece goes to an independent school in just outside of London, and on the Black History Month, day of Black History Month, particular day that they were celebrating literature, she was on assembly and I think she was chatting with her friend, and all of a sudden the book came up on the screen, and she was like, that's my auntie's book. So I think that, to answer your question, I think that it's been actively sort of talked about in schools. I think teachers I think the themes in the book they might be heavy themes, but I think the description of them are, I'm hoping that they're not into, especially for the things that are quite heavy, or some of the sins, they're not too I think heavy on the soul or the spirit, I think. So I think teachers are using their discretion as to what makes sense, but I've been invited to a lot of opportunities to speak to schools.
Because that would just be so amazing. I think what happens is I think some teachers are more protective of the kids than what they actually read. You know what I mean? Like kids can handle this book, most kids, but I sometimes, we've come across, I don't hear this, I'm having my own little drama in my head over, bringing an author in, and then the teachers, the champion of the book saying it's great, and then some teacher saying, oh no, this isn't appropriate, it's like,
I've certainly received a number of invites to speak at schools when things settle down. So I'm taking that as a good sign.
You might get some from Milwaukee. And Oconomowaukee, you might get some.
Yeah, I would have eaten this book up as a teenager. I mean, just, my sense of justice at that time and injustice was such, and people handle it with so many kid gloves. You need it. You need some direction to feed it and to understand it. And this book really helps you process. Yeah, it's great that way. And I got off track. I liked the character of Tia and the relationship that they had. And it was a nice balance to have somebody to show that you really do need somebody to care for you. There needs to, and it doesn't have to be in your immediate family, but to have that place where somebody stops and sees you. And that was such an important part of the novel. I think that's what makes it bearable in so many ways, is that there was somebody who saw and cared.
Absolutely. And I think it was important for me to show the possibilities. Yes. Because, and it's interesting because when I was speaking to a Nigerian book club a while back, many of them said because of Tia, they feel that they can actually do a lot more than they've done. Like the fact that you can have a relationship with someone who is completely different to who you are, different backgrounds, different class, different, it can happen, and it should happen. And also I'm quite interested in and keen on mentorship. And I think that it's mentoring young girls, young boys. I don't think it costs much more than your time. And I really wanted to show that, even though Tia could afford to pay, give Aduni something monetary or financial, all this cost her was an hour or so. And I really wanted to show that, kindness really doesn't have to be financial. It often shouldn't be, to be honest. It should be just a smile, a thank you, your time to mentor somebody else. I really want to show that. Now, of course, and how they got along, of course, they came from two different backgrounds, but they had something in common they did not realize until they came together, which was the loneliness and the need to belong and to get understood. And that brought them together as well. So you never know where you find sort of kinship.
And I like that it wasn't financial, that it was a caring, it's seen. Yeah, it's a human connection. Yeah. Thank you for that. Daniel.
I was going to say there, it is tough because there's some tough people in this book, but Mr. Coffee, he also brings what he can to help. And I liked him a lot. Inspired by anybody in particular? Or?
We had, no, actually not really. We just had, there was this man that worked for us many years ago. He used to, many years ago, he came from Ghana, and he used to help us around the house. And he never used to say anything. He was actually very quiet, very hard-faced, and he was an extremely hard worker. And that's it. But it's amazing how when you start writing, and it happens to me a lot, and you just think of that guy, and I thought I would completely flip him around and make him a caring guy who is not too, he doesn't like to show Aduni that he cares for her, but sometimes he lets his guard down and show her that. So I think he was partly inspired by that guy, but I also wanted to show, there's this banter between Nigerians and Ghanaians. Nigerians eat jollof rice, which is rice cooked in tomato sauce. And there's always been a debate. I think even Barack Obama got into it between which jollof rice is better, the Ghanaian and the Nigerian jollof rice. And I thought, well, why don't you make a Ghanaian a cook? Like, let him cook the whole jollof rice and let's see what happens. And so that was just me having fun. But I ended up it started with that, but then it now grew into more of a father-daughter relationship, because Kofi doesn't have his family with him, and he sees Aduni as his daughter. And she also doesn't have that relationship with her father. And so she kind of sees Kofi as her father who protects her in certain instances in the story.
Yeah.
Do you mind, Lisa, may I ask, I'm going to ask one of the Q&A questions from Pat, and because I was curious about this too, is one of the interesting things about the book is how you bracket chapters with the factual information about Nigeria. And what got you to add it? Was it in the original version of the book? Was it like, what was the metamorphosis of that? It's a lot.
Yeah, so that was an afterthought. I had finished the book. And I belong to a writers group, and I was getting a lot of feedback. And one of the things that came out was the fact that it felt like Aduni, as wonderful as she was, she felt like, especially in Big Madam's house, she was kind of moving on from one thing to the other without having anything to anchor her down. And so the challenge was for me to find something. And so I thought, well, what could be better thing than for her to find a book that she falls in love with, and teaches her, educates her. So I thought of the dictionary, started with the dictionary. So when you read the scenes where she finds the definitions of things for innocent and stuff, it was going to be, my plan was to have every chapter start with the definition of something. But I thought, you're not learning anything new, right? I mean, my reader, who then was my supervisor and myself, you're not learning anything new. So why don't you do something that's completely novel? Why don't you have Aduni find a book of facts about Nigeria? Because my daughters, one of them, the younger one, had this huge book she would lug around the house called, I think, something, an encyclopedia of stuff. And she would turn it around and read and be like, oh, mom, look. And she would discover something. So and like I said, I sort of shadowed my daughter a lot when I was writing Aduni. So I thought, Aduni would be fascinated by stuff around Nigeria. So that was one of the reasons. So I decided to then retrospectively fit the fact into the theme of the chapter. So because I had already written the book, I couldn't sort of start inventing new, so I had to find facts that fed into the chapter. But it was also an opportunity for me to kind of change the narrative around Nigeria that had been drip fed from the media. There's a lot of negative, stereotypical information out there about Nigerians. And I thought, why don't you use this opportunity to show how vast and how different and how disparate we are, and how amazing, but sometimes not so great. We're just a normal, nation that has come through a lot of challenges. And so that really served a lot of purposes by doing that.
I'm going to send it to Lisa, but I wanted to comment about how when we talk about other countries, we always focus on the very wealthy and the very poor, and we forget about how large a middle class can be in a country like Nigeria.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking about the way you use loud and louding. You want to talk about that? In one of the interviews, you were saying that being loud was one way, but being louding is quite different.
Absolutely. So, I mean, obviously there is the standard, non-standard, standard English debate, but really the louding was quite deliberate, because for Aduni, it's an opportunity for her to not just achieve her education, but for her to leave a legacy. So it's continuous. It doesn't ever end. So even after, there's part in the book where she says that I want to walk into a room and not see anything, and and people would sort of remember me, something along those lines. I want to be able to basically leave a legacy that is positive. I want to change lives. And so, and for Aduni, it's also a way for her to fight for what she believes in. And so having it as the girl with the louding voice tells me and tells anyone that, you know, pursuing your dreams, speaking up for what you believe in, it's a continuous thing. It doesn't end on day one. Even after you've achieved that goal, there's always something else that you can speak for and fight for that you believe in. So that's really where that came from. And of course, her mother said it to her, and she corrects her mother and says, I actually want a louding voice. And she's deliberate about that.
And it's a verb. I mean, it's a very active. Loud is just constant. It's more active. Yeah, I thought that was great. Something I will carry.
Well, I think you'll be surprised when people start using it in other contexts. You're
yeah,
like,
I agree.
I kind of invented that.
I agree. Thank you for that. But I have my friend was saying to me that she sent an email at work the other day, and she titled it, you know, Finding Your Louding Voice, and she explained why. And then at the end, she said, well, actually, this is my friend wrote a book. Well, you might want to check it out. So yeah, it's interesting, you know, that has happened, and I'm so grateful for that, because you don't think about that as an author. You're just really in your world and writing your story.
Staying on the topic of language, Megan wrote that she's a professional translator, and she thought your description was spot on about problematic literal translations. I'd love for you to comment on this. And it's funny because I'm reading this, I just finished this other book called Swimming Back to Trout River, which is a Chinese narrative, Chinese American narrative. And my favorite part of the book was when she talked about things in Chinese that don't translate well to English. And I'm curious as to whether you came across that in Yoruba and English as well.
Oh, so much. I think that's really was the bedrock, the foundation of Adeni's, you know, because she's very much Yoruba, and because she really is desperate to speak good English until she realizes that it's not the measure of intelligence, as she says. But at the start of the story, she's like, I really need to get this language. I really want to be educated so I can speak it and get a good job. But you know, and another example is when you say I'm hungry, right? If I'm hungry is what you say in English, but if the Yoruba says ebi n pa mi, which is hunger is killing me. And Adeni says that a lot. I think she says that once or twice in the story. That's where that came from. So there's so many examples of that. And I had a lot of fun doing that. So I would, first of all, know what so when I'm writing the book, I would know the scene in English that I was going to write, but then I would then translate in Yoruba in my mind first. Then I would write out the literal translation on paper. Then I would need to wordsmith it so that it's logical and it makes sense and flows and has the cadence. Because when I write, I hear beats. I can't explain that. It's like music to me. And so there has to be a sound to my words. And so I would manipulate the word, the translation, so that it sounds like music in my ears. Yeah.
I heard that too while I read it. And it was fun too. I mean, there's just so much in the book, but it was fun to go on and start Googling terms and then falling down the rabbit hole and having a virtual visit to Nigeria and Lagos and just see where everything was. And that's, I think we complain about, getting online all the time, but it does really add that space. So that was fun for me. Daniel, is there any other questions? I don't have anything burning.
I was curious about her, like the original family, Alau and Teus, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, her relationship with her brothers, and that's sort of, so many interesting side characters, and that's I was thinking about, there is a love story in this book. It's not, I would say it's Khadijah's, I guess, is the great love story. That would, a tragic love story, so that would appeal to teenagers. What did you have more, like, this book is not a short book. It's, 350 pages. Did you have to cut, and what did you cut?
I cut out a particularly horrendous ending. I cut out about 40,000 words in the story before anyone else saw it. And I cut it because, like, she could only take so much. And so after she left Big Madam's house, she went into a lot more horrible.
Oh,
And I couldn't take that.
none of us could. This is a lot to take already.
Oh my gosh, I know. So I highlighted the 40,000 words.
Well,
And
that has to do with what you said, that you were going to focus on her optimism.
yes,
because,
yes, absolutely. Because I was like, look, this is not helping anyone, just not. So I deleted. I never delete anything. I have a trash can called do not delete. So
right.
it kills me to delete 40,000 words of my words. So I put it in there, and it's still there. I can still look at it. And then I rewrote the ending to be just a little bit more.
Maybe that's somebody else's, the beginning of their story.
Absolutely.
Right? I don't know if I don't know. For some people, that's the ending. They want a tragic ending. It doesn't feel like you, but I don't know you, but I just like, I don't know.
I think a lot about Big Madam and how we slowly see where she's come from and where her anger comes from. And she's one that I hope for a better world.
Absolutely. And she tells the story of many, many women who are from very comfortable families and societies and are wealthy, but they're still trapped in a cycle of abuse and can't get out because of what society would say. And that's something I'm quite interested in, and probably have a story brewing in there somewhere.
Yeah. It's a tough one because it's sort of, her shell cracks, but it's hard to forgive her. So it's going to take a really great writer to bring that to life, but I think you've got it in you.
No, thank you. No pressure at all.
I love when, I just want to say, I love in the Kayla's Fabrics where I think it's Kayla's Fabrics where she says the store smelled like money. I do love fabrics.
Right? Do you know money? I smell, especially note. We don't use a lot of notes, paper money here. But in Nigeria, there's a lot of paper money, and there is a smell to it. And I love to write with, evoke all the five senses. So, it was important for someone who's from poverty, it's a distinct smell. When she smells money, she's like, that is money. Oh my gosh.
Are there a lot of women that are in that position where they're running the business, they're the main income for families, middle class like that, or upper class even?
So many women are doing that, and many women don't say they're doing that. And again, there's so much potential for stories. Another thing I really want to explore, because a lot of women are the main breadwinners, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I think that it's what you tend to find is that the women are ashamed to say this, so they put it as if it's their husbands that are doing these things. And there's a scene in the book where Big Madam puts the offering money for church in Big Daddy's, gives it to him, and that's very common. You find many women would give their husbands the fees for the children's school fees, for the school fees to their husbands to pay. I mean, so if it works for them, fine, but it's very common, and a lot of women cover that, and on top of that, there's a lot of abuse for many women in that, because there's a resentment, from the spouses that these women are so successful and holding the home together. And that's something I hope I can get to exploring at some point in the future with my writing.
You've got like a lot of books in you, which we're excited about.
Very.
I don't have any more. I'm just checking to do a last run of questions from the audience. I don't. You did actually, I probably have to go back and listen to write down some of your other recommendations. Is there anything recent that's come out that you've liked? Any books? And they don't have to come out here yet. Maybe we can force them to publish them here.
There's a book called The Music of Bees, which will be coming out. I think it might have come out by Dutton as well. Do check that out. That's really wonderful.
Music of Bees, you said?
Yes.
Okay. I'll figure out, maybe get that out to people as well. That's really great. We're so grateful that you joined us today. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
What an honor.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, I sent through a link. You can purchase it from either store, or if you're joining us from somewhere else, your favorite independent store, no matter what it is. We're grateful. You might want to go in and say, Danielle and Lisa told me to buy this book. And we'd be grateful for that because it's always nice to be appreciated. Thank you so much. Continued success to you and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you for having me. Take care. Have a good evening all.
You too.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Bye.